Enoch is standing at a mountain in the west. Not a metaphor, a mountain. In the text's own geography, Enoch is on a guided tour of the cosmos, taken by angelic beings through the structure of the heavens and the earth. And his guide has brought him here, to a place he describes with the specific, deliberate language of a man who is looking at something real, not dreaming it. There is rock. There are hollow places cut into that rock. They are deep. They are smooth. One of them holds a spring of water and light. The others hold nothing but the dark. Nobody here has received the final verdict. Everybody here is waiting for judgment. That disruption is the point. This is not the completed place of final punishment. According to the text's own internal logic, the cosmology First Enoch builds, across chapters 18 to 27, final judgment has not occurred. The fiery locations in this text concern celestial transgressors, not human souls. One already occupied by bound stars, another shown as the permanent prison where angels will later be confined. The valley in this text is designated and cursed in advance, but its future occupants are described only in the future tense. Even the human sinners described in these chambers are, at this exact point in the text's cosmological architecture, not undergoing their final sentence. They are being held in an interim condition, sorted by category, waiting for the judgment that has not yet arrived. And there is a difference, this text insists, a genuine structural difference between those two conditions, and it goes to considerable theological effort to maintain that difference across multiple chapters, multiple locations, and multiple categories of the dead. By the end of this video, you will understand the architecture of these holding rooms and who is assigned to each: the righteous, the wronged, the guilty, and a fourth category that breaks the pattern of all three. You will understand which fiery location is already occupied, which is shown prospectively as a future permanent prison, and why neither is identified as a destination for human spirits. And you will understand the valley, already designated, already cursed, visible in the geography of this cosmology before any condemned soul is described as arriving there, described in the future tense, waiting for a day the text refuses to date. What you believe happens to the guilty, the instant they die, says something about what you think justice actually is, immediate or deferred, a verdict already executed at the moment of death, or a sequence still in progress. Separation first, interim conditions already active, final resolution still to come. Popular depictions have often preferred the immediate version. Die badly, arrive in the fire. The verdict implied by the life, the punishment following without delay. This text chooses a different order, and it defends that choice not as a concession to uncertainty, but as a positive commitment to how it thinks a just cosmology must be structured. The universe has a structure. That structure has a logic, and the logic insists that the interim comes before the judgment, and the judgment before the final and completed recompense, and that the apparatus of that final recompense has been described and is waiting for a day that has not yet arrived. But hold one question before this argument opens. Among the holding rooms on this mountain is one reserved for a category of the dead the text names in a single sentence and never explains again. spirits who will not be raised from their chamber on the day of judgment and will not receive additional punishment on that day either. Every other chamber is oriented toward a future reckoning. This is the only one the text explicitly says will not release its dead. Hold what could possibly earn that fate in a cosmology built on the premise that everything is waiting to be resolved. This is a real place in the text's own geography. A mountain, hollow places cut into stone, and a named guide who stands at the entrance to this holding architecture and explains what it is for. By the end of this chapter, you will understand where this scene sits in Enoch's cosmic tour, who is showing him around, and what the initial architecture of the mountain tells you about the theology underlying it, before the specific assignments of its rooms are even named. First Enoch, the Ethiopic Enoch, preserved most completely in the Ge'ez manuscript tradition and translated in the Standard Critical Edition by George Nicholsburg in the Hermaniah commentary series, is a composite text. Several distinct sections were probably composed across different centuries of Second Temple Jewish religious thought, later brought together into the form we have. Within it, chapters 1 through 36 belong to what scholars call the Book of the Watchers. This section contains a series of guided cosmic journeys. Enoch is taken by angelic beings through the structure of the heavens and the earth, shown the architecture of the wind and the fire, the prisons of transgressing spirits, and, beginning in chapter 22, the holding place of the human dead. The journey is the genre. Apocalyptic literature of the Second Temple period routinely structured its revelations as guided tours, and what matters is not the itinerary, but the argument. Each location Enoch visits is not a spectacle. It is evidence for a claim about how the cosmos works. The mountain of the hollow places in the west is evidence for a very specific claim: that the human dead are held in an organized, categorized, deliberately structured interim state before any final judgment occurs. By the time Enoch reaches chapter 22, he has already been taken to the ends of the earth. He has seen storehouses of wind and fire. He has stood at a chaotic, blazing void, a place of disordered fire and darkness, where transgressing angelic beings are held under binding. That location and what it means for the timing of final punishment is material we will return to in the second half of this video. But it is worth noting, even at this early stage, the structural parallel. The cosmos of First Enoch is full of prepared holding places. The interim condition is not an afterthought or a transitional convenience. It is built into the fabric of how this cosmology understands justice. Things are held until the appointed time. The appointed time has not yet come. This is true of transgressing angels. It is true of human beings. It is true of the instruments of punishment themselves. Enoch arrives at the mountain in the west, chapter 22, verses 1 and 2. A great and high mountain in the west, with hollow places in the rock, deep and smooth. The description is precise in the way reportage is precise. The author is not describing a type of place, a symbolic category of place, but a specific located place with specific physical characteristics. The hollow places are smooth. Their smoothness gives the impression of prepared spaces. And Raphael's explanation confirms that they were created for a function: to receive and hold the spirits of the human dead until the day of judgment. The mountain itself is not incidental to the text's geography. It appears because it has to be somewhere. The text insists that these things exist in real places, that the cosmos is a structure you could in principle navigate, that Enoch's tour is not a dream, but a revelation of what is actually there. Standing at this mountain, Enoch asks the question the text expects him to ask: why is this place like this? And his guide answers it. The guide's name is Raphael. Chapter 20, verse 3 of the Angelic Catalogue identifies him specifically as the angel in charge of the spirits of humans. That is his role in this chapter, and it is the only aspect of Raphael's function this episode draws from. Raphael has a broader identity elsewhere in the text, and in the tradition. He appears in the book of Tobit. He has a role in the binding of Azazel in chapter 10 of 1st Enoch, and he is associated in the wider angelological tradition with healing and protection. None of that is developed here. Here he is the custodial figure, the angel responsible for the spirits of the human dead, the angel placed over the spirits of human beings, which is precisely why the text brings him here, rather than any other figure, to explain what the mountain is for and what it contains. A mountain of stone in the west, hollow places cut into the rock, deep, smooth. One of them holds a spring of water and light. The others hold nothing but the dark. Raphael is responsible for human spirits. That is why he understands this place well. Raphael's answer to Enoch's question is the foundational statement on which the entire argument of chapter 22 rests. These hollow places, he explains, were made for this purpose: to receive and gather the spirits of all the sons of man until the day of their judgment. That phrase, until the day of their judgment, contains the theology of the entire mountain in 6 words. Until, not arrived at, not completed, not serving as the final destination. Until. The judgment is a future event. The holding is the current condition. The mountain occupies the space between those 2 moments. And everything about it, the categorization, the different conditions, the different futures projected for each room, is organized around the premise that the interval matters, and that what happens in the interval is not the same thing as what happens when the interval ends. One primary argument for this chapter: before anything is said about reward or punishment, the text establishes this as a holding place reached immediately after death, not a final destination. The architecture of the interim is the argument. The assignments of the rooms are the application of that argument to specific categories of the human dead. And the mountain holds more than Raphael has yet described. One of its hollow places has been named in outline, but passed over without elaboration. The guide does not linger there. He moves instead to the rooms where the logic of categorization is clearest, and that deferral, that deliberate passing over, is itself part of what the mountain is telling you. 3 fates are already visible in the architecture of this mountain, each sorted by a different logic, each pointing toward a different future. And the question of what separates them begins to be the most important question in the text. 3 of the 4 hollow places are described in enough detail to understand exactly who belongs in each of them, and none of them involve fire. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the room of the righteous, the room of the ordinary sinners, and the room of those who died having been wronged, and the single most important structural feature they all share. Begin with the room that is easiest to understand. Chapter 22, verse 9. The hollow on the bright side, a spring of water, light. This is the holding place of the righteous, those whose lives, by the text's reckoning, place them among the upright. What is immediately striking about this room is not what it contains, but what it confirms. The righteous are not in the same kind of suspense. Their condition is already one of rest. The spring and the light are not rewards in the formal sense because the formal verdict has not yet been delivered, but they are signs that the verdict, when it comes, will confirm what is already functionally true. The righteous are being held in conditions that correspond to what they are owed. They wait, as everyone on this mountain waits, for the day of judgment. But their waiting has a quality entirely different from the waiting in the other rooms. That is the first room, and its argument is simple. Righteousness earns a different interim than sin. The second room is more theologically complex. Chapter 22, verses 10 and 11, describe a hollow that is dark. Darkness explicitly contrasted with the light and water of the first room, and associated with what the text calls great pain, or great suffering depending on the translation. This room belongs to sinners, specifically, and this is the precision the text insists on, to sinners who died without punishment falling on them during their lives. The logic is the inverse of the righteous room. The righteous earned rest in life. They have rest in death, pending the confirmation of the final verdict. The guilty were not brought to account in life. They are held in something other than rest, pending the delivery of a verdict that has not yet come. But the nature of their suffering requires careful attention. Nicolsburg's Hermeneia commentary and his translation of this passage use language of great torment to describe their interim condition, torment that the text distinguishes from the further scourges and recompense associated with the day of judgment itself. This is the key distinction the text draws, not between suffering and no suffering, but between an adverse interim condition and the executed final sentence. The sinners in this hollow are already in a genuinely tormenting state. What has not yet happened is the final judgment that will assess, pronounce upon, and complete their punishment. That distinction is not a theological nicety imposed from outside. It is a distinction chapter 22 itself insists on. The same chapter that describes the sinner's present torment also speaks of a future great judgment and of further scourges and recompense after that judgment. The current torment and the completed final recompense are two separate events on the text's own timeline. The sinner hollow contains real, present adverse experience, but it is a present condition that the text explicitly places before the judgment's full resolution, not after it. That is the second room. The third is the most textually intricate. Chapter 22, verses 5 through 7, describe a hollow associated with a voice, a petition, a formal cry for vindication, Nickelsburg's analysis identifies this as the hollow for those who were murdered or died suffering injustice without receiving any redress during their lives. The spirit crying out from this hollow is explicitly identified in the text as Abel, murdered by his brother Cain, and his cry is a formal legal appeal. The imagery is courtroom imagery. Someone has been wronged, they are pressing a claim, and they are awaiting the hearing that will answer it. The hollow for the wronged is not a place of dread. It is a place of a petition still open, a wrong still outstanding, a verdict owed and not yet delivered but explicitly promised. A caution here that the text itself warrants. Across the manuscript tradition and the history of translation, the exact verse-level assignment of the categories to specific hollows involves genuine variation. Scholars working in this area, and Nickelsburg's Hermania commentary is the standard reference, note that the ordering and precise mapping of categories to rooms should be held with some flexibility. What is consistent is the structure: righteous, wronged, guilty, and a fourth category distinguished from the rest. The specific assignments are an approximation that the textual tradition does not resolve with complete certainty, and any confident verse-level mapping should carry that acknowledgement. 3 rooms, 3 very different conditions, and the single most important observation about all of them is the one that connects them structurally. Every one of these 3 categories of the dead is still pointing forward to a future event. The righteous are confirmed but not yet formally vindicated in the final judgment. The wronged are pressing a petition that has not yet been answered. The guilty are in a genuinely tormenting interim condition, already adverse, already a form of consequence, while the final judgment that will deliver the completed and permanent reckoning has not yet arrived. This is a cosmology of the deferred final verdict. Nothing in these 3 rooms is final. Everything is pending. The mountain holds the human dead in conditions corresponding to what each category is owed. But it has not yet completed what any of those conditions point toward. It is keeping them organized and categorized, sorted and held, until the day that will finally resolve what the mountain can only anticipate. Every fate accounted for so far involves a future hearing of some kind. Every one of the 3 rooms we have now visited carries, built into its own structure, the premise that something is coming, a verdict, a vindication, a trial, that will bring to completion what the mountain is only holding in suspension, except for the room that the guide has still not fully described. 3 rooms, 3 futures, all of them pending. And it would be easy to conclude that pending is just a more polite word for punishment already happening. The case that this mountain is functionally hell already has genuine force. The text supplies real suffering language, real darkness, real categories of the condemned. By the end of this chapter, you will understand that argument in its strongest form and why the text itself supplies the grounds for dismantling it. Make the case honestly. The sinners are in darkness. The text describes their condition with language of great pain, not mild discomfort, not mere inconvenience, but something that registers as genuine suffering. They are sorted by category, placed in a designated hollow, physically separated from the bright spring of the righteous. The wronged are in a separate hollow, crying out for vindication, which is not a description of peace or comfort. even the righteous, in their resting place with the spring of water, are in a holding condition that has not yet delivered the verdict their righteousness has earned. Strip away the eschatological framing. The claim that a future judgment is coming, that these conditions are interim rather than final. And what you are looking at is a place of darkness, suffering, sorting, and separation, structured around categories of moral desert. Calling it a waiting room is a theological distinction that may tell you more about the text's eschatological commitments than about any real difference in the experience of its occupants. The suffering is present, the darkness is present, the categorization by moral quality is present. Whether you call it hell or call it a pre-hell holding space, the conditions are doing the same work as hell does in later traditions, assigning the guilty to suffering and the righteous to rest. And the functional difference between present torment awaiting judgment and judgment already delivered is not obvious from the inside. Nickelsburg's translation uses the word torment. If the waiting is tormenting, what exactly does the judgment add that the holding has not already begun? That argument has real weight. The great torment language is not easily set aside. The text does not explain the precise nature of this torment, whether it is an imposed adverse condition, an experience of apprehension, or both. What it does establish is the sequence. The torment is already present, while the great day of judgment and the further scourges and recompense associated with it remain future. The text makes that distinction within the same chapter. The question is, what that distinction is actually doing. Here is where the text dismantles the objection. And it dismantles it not with assertion, but with architecture. The argument for the false resolution reading requires that the sinner hollow and the final judgment be identical in what they are doing. But the text keeps them structurally distinct at two levels. First, the language. The suffering in the sinner hollow is described as torment preceding a great day of judgment. Nickelsburg's translation of that same chapter goes on to describe further scourges and recompense after that judgment, which means the chapter is itself distinguishing between the present interim condition and what comes after the judgment resolves the case. The interim involves genuine torment. The completed final recompense is a separate, still future event. The text is not reducing the interim to comfort. It is distinguishing one form of consequence from another. Second, the geography. The text has placed other prepared locations in the same cosmological map. Places of fiery confinement for celestial transgressors elsewhere in the cosmos, a valley whose future occupants are described only in the future tense. These locations operate on different temporal levels. One fiery confinement is already occupied by transgressing stars. Another is described prospectively, a permanent prison shown in advance. The valley's gathering is given only in the future tense. What they share is not identical in activity, but their refusal to collapse every category of offender and every stage of judgment into one universal destination. The mountain fits within that same refusal. The mountain's interim holds the human dead in conditions that correspond to what each category is owed, in a state that precedes rather than replaces the final reckoning. The false resolution reading treats the mountain as the destination. Read in the final form of the Book of the Watchers. The mountain functions as an anteroom rather than the completed destination. A distinction established within chapter 22 and reinforced by the differentiated locations surrounding it. What the first 3 chapters of this argument have assembled is a portrait of a universe paused mid-verdict. The human dead are sorted, categorized, and held in conditions that already correspond to what each category is owed. The righteous in rest, the wronged pressing their petition, the guilty in a genuinely adverse state, the text describes as torment. But the final judgment has not been delivered, and the conditions of the mountain have not yet completed what they point toward. What the mountain contains is a differentiated interim, already morally meaningful, already consequential, but interim nonetheless. The judgment is the turning point. The full resolution of what each category is owed, the completed and permanent form of what the holding conditions have only begun, is what follows the turning point. And the text insists that the turning point has not yet arrived. That reframe makes the logic clearer. And it makes one room on the mountain stranger than it appeared before. Everything just established about waiting, about verdicts deferred, about justice held in suspension until the appointed day. All of it assumes that a trial is coming. That assumption holds for every room on this mountain, except one. The room that the guide deferred, the room that breaks the pattern not by being darker or more severe, but by having no onward movement on the day of judgment. A differentiated interim, morally meaningful, already adverse for the guilty, but interim nonetheless. Except for one chamber on this mountain, which functions differently from every other. And that chamber is the one the text says, its dead will not leave on the day of judgment. One hollow on this mountain is described in a single sentence. And what that sentence says breaks the pattern that every other room in the text has established. By the end of this chapter, you will understand exactly what chapter 22, verse 13 actually claims, why the scholarly tradition has argued about it for generations, and why a chamber that simply never releases its occupants is, in this text's logic, a stranger fate than any of the rooms we have already seen. The structure of the mountain so far has a clear grammar. Each room corresponds to a category of the dead. Each category has a forward trajectory. Each trajectory involves some kind of movement toward vindication, toward the hearing of a petition, toward the judgment that will resolve the guilt held in suspension. Every room we have visited is a transit point. It holds the dead until the event that will transfer them somewhere, into the confirmation of the righteous, into the answer of the wronged, into whatever the day of judgment delivers for the guilty. The mountain is organized around the premise that the holding is temporary. Something is coming that will resolve each category and move it onward. Chapter 22, verse 13, describes a hollow, separate, distinct from those already named. And what it says about this hollow's occupants is the single most theologically compressed and disputed statement in the chapter. In Nicholsburg's translation, their spirits will not be punished on the day of judgment, nor will they be raised from there. Not raised, not punished on the day of judgment. That is what the text says. And what it does not say is nearly as significant as what it does. Every other room in this mountain points toward the judgment day as its resolution. This is the only chamber the text explicitly says will not release its dead, not raised from it, not punished additionally on the day of judgment, not a more severe fate, a different relationship to the process entirely. Nickelsburg's Hermania commentary engages at length with the difficulty of identifying who occupies this hollow and why. Several readings have been proposed across the manuscript tradition and the history of interpretation. Some commentators understand them as sinners who have already received a form of punishment in this life. So the Judgment Day exemption is not mercy, but completion. What was owed has already been paid, and the Judgment Day does not apply to accounts the text considers settled. Others have read the verse as reflecting a non-universal resurrection scheme, in which a certain category of the dead simply does not participate in the resurrection event that brings others before the judgment. If these spirits are not raised, they cannot be judged further. A third scholarly reading treats the occupants of this hollow as comparatively ordinary or lesser sinners rather than exceptional ones. The exemption from additional Judgment Day punishment would then represent not a more severe fate, but a reduced one, a category that requires no further reckoning beyond what it has already experienced. The manuscript tradition itself introduces variation in how the relevant verses are transmitted, which compounds the difficulty. None of these readings commands universal agreement. What Nickelsburg's analysis makes clear is that the criterion for inclusion in this hollow is genuinely unclear in the text, and any confident claim about who qualifies goes beyond what the evidence permits. What can be said with precision is the structural anomaly this hollow creates within the mountain's logic. Every other category, righteous, wronged, guilty, has a forward trajectory in the text. The holding is temporary, and the judgment day is the event that resolves it. For the righteous, the judgment brings vindication. For the wronged, it brings the answer to Abel's cry. For the guilty, it brings whatever the reckoning delivers, including, the text suggests in the same chapter, further scourges and recompense beyond the torment already experienced in the interim. All of those trajectories point forward. All of them are oriented toward the judgment as their resolution. The fourth hollow is the structural exception. Its occupants are not raised on that day. They do not receive additional punishment on that day. What the judgment day does for every other category in this mountain is precisely what it does not do here: arrive as the event that moves them forward. The chamber's relationship to the judgment is defined by what does not happen to it rather than by what does. Whether the exemption from additional judgment day punishment represents a mercy, a reduced or already completed outcome for those the text considers settled before the judgment arrives, or a more ambiguous exclusion from the resurrection event that brings all the others before the court, is a question the text does not resolve. What it gives is the structural fact. This hollow functions differently from every other room in the mountain. Every other room points towards the judgment day as its next event. This chamber is the one the text explicitly says will not release its occupants into that event, not raised from it, not given additional punishment on that day. The text leaves it there. Every chamber in this mountain points towards the day of judgment as its resolution, except one, which simply persists. The rest of this text's geography raises a different question. If the mountain is where the human dead are held, where does the text put everyone else? And what does the presence of other prepared locations tell you about how this cosmology has divided its condemned? The text describes two fiery locations, one visibly occupied by transgressing stars, the other shown as a permanent prison where angels will later be confined. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what distinguishes those two places, who belongs in each, and what their existence tells you about how this cosmology categorizes its different categories of transgressor. Chapter 18 of 1st Enoch describes a chaotic, blazing region at the edges of the cosmos, a place of formlessness and fire that Enoch reaches in the earlier stages of his tour. Pillars of fire reach upward. And chapter 21 returns to similar territory with a structural distinction the text itself marks. Verses 1 through 6 describe 7 stars, bound in a form that likens them to mountains burning, a place of confinement that Enoch is visibly shown, already occupied. Verses 7 through 10 move to a second, more terrible location, an even darker and more chaotic void, which Uriel identifies as a prison reserved for the angels who transgress the order of heaven. The language there is prospective. This place is a prison for the angels, and here they will be confined forever. These are not one location in two descriptions. They are two distinct places, distinguished within the chapter by Enoch's own movement from the first to the second, and described with different temporal registers, the first visibly occupied, the second shown in advance of its permanent use. In 1st Enoch's cosmology, stars are not passive celestial bodies. They are angelic beings with assigned functions in the ordered movement of the heavens, responsible for the regulation of the calendar and the courses of the sky. The 7 stars of chapter 21 are those who transgressed their appointed order, left their stations, acted outside the boundaries of their commissioned function. They are presently bound and burning in the first location. The prison of verses 7 through 10 is where angels will be permanently confined. It is shown to Enoch before that confinement is underway in full. In both cases, the text is concerned with celestial transgressors, not with human spirits. The judgment remains future. The interim holds. Read together in the final form of the Book of the Watchers. These locations create a structural parallel with the mountain. Angelic transgressors are held in prepared places of confinement, in conditions corresponding to what they have done, pending a future judgment. Human transgressors are held in the mountain's chambers, in conditions corresponding to what they have done, pending a future judgment. A comparable pattern can be traced across both. Hold the condemned, keep them secured, assign them to conditions appropriate to their category, and leave the final resolution for the appointed day. The interim is not the completed sentence. The confinement precedes the final resolution. The judgment is still to come. Whether that parallel represents a single conceived architecture or the convergence of different traditions that the text draws together, Chapter 6 will address. The point here is that the pattern is present across the final form of the work, and it applies differently to each category of transgressor it has to account for. But the parallel has a limit. The fiery places and the mountain are not the same location, not the same kind of space, and, crucially, they do not share the same current population. The text keeps those populations separate. Human spirits are in the mountain's chambers. Celestial transgressors are in the fiery places of chapters 18 and 21. Those two categories of condemned being are held in different locations, by different means, in different kinds of interim condition. The text does not describe the human dead being transferred to the fiery places at any point. Not now, not at the judgment. The human dead have their own location, their own architecture, their own logic. There is also the binding described in chapter 10, the watchers held in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment, which is already established in prior material on this channel. The principle repeats. Angelic transgressors are bound, held, confined, until the judgment that will formally resolve their case. The text builds a cosmos full of interim holding places for different categories of transgressor, all organized around a comparable premise, all oriented toward future judgment or completion, each on its own terms. The result is not one universal hell, but a differentiated map. Human spirits in the mountain, celestial transgressors in their own places of confinement, and no transfer between those populations stated anywhere in these chapters. There is also, earlier in the text, a brief reference to the binding described in chapter 10, where the watchers, whose descent is already established in prior material on this channel, are described as bound in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment. That principle repeats across the cosmology. Different categories of angelic transgressor, bound in different locations, waiting for the same future reckoning, while the human dead wait separately in the mountain's chambers, in conditions of their own. The structure is consistent across the final form of the work. The populations are kept apart. And elsewhere in this text's geography, on the ground, near the center of the earth, in the narrative's own framing, there is a third kind of prepared location, marked and set apart for a future gathering the text describes in explicitly forward-facing terms. The text designates an actual valley, a real place in its own geography, and declares it accursed before any condemned soul is described as gathered there. By the end of this chapter, you will understand what this valley is in the logic of first Enoch's cosmology, how it relates to the imagery of later tradition, and why the text describes its future occupants in the future tense, rather than as a present population. Chapter 27 of 1st Enoch, Enoch's guided tour has moved to a different part of its geography, what the narrative calls the center of the earth, a landscape commonly identified by scholars with Jerusalem and its surrounding valleys, though the text itself names no specific location. Enoch looks into a valley and asks his guide what it is. The question is Enoch's standard method across the Book of the Watchers. He sees something, he asks its significance, and the guide's answer reveals the cosmological architecture behind the visible world. The valley is not incidental to the landscape. It is there because it has a function assigned to it before any of the dead Enoch has met on the mountain have been sent anywhere. The guides answer, this valley is accursed. It has been designated. The language of cursing in this context is the language of reservation, a formal designation that claims this place for a specific future use and sets it apart from ordinary geography. The text speaks of the cursed being gathered there at the last times, during righteous judgment. That gathering is described in the future tense. No present population is identified. The designation precedes the event it describes. The resonance between this valley and the Gehenna of later Jewish and Christian tradition is real, and has been noted by scholars who work on Second Temple afterlife belief. The Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna in Hebrew, which gives Gehenna its name, is a real topographical feature near Jerusalem, with a history in the Hebrew Bible as a site of aberrant religious practice, and by extension, as a symbol of destruction and divine judgment. By the rabbinic period, Gehenna has developed into a theological concept for the place of final punishment, a concept rich enough to generate extensive discussion across rabbinic literature. In early Christian tradition, the term appears in the Gospels as a description of the fate of the condemned. That developed theological concept is the Gehenna most audiences recognize. The relationship between First Enoch's accursed valley and the fully developed Gehenna of later tradition is a relationship of antecedent imagery and shared vocabulary, not of direct doctrinal descent. Scholarship on Second Temple afterlife belief has become increasingly careful about direct lineage claims. The textual tradition is not a simple pipeline in which one text causes another text's theology. First Enoch is part of a broader world of Second Temple Jewish religious imagination, in which the valley of the condemned image, the fire of judgment image, and the holding place before judgment image all appear in various configurations across a range of texts and traditions. Later traditions drew on that world, selected from it, developed what they found useful, and in many cases collapsed the stage distinctions between interim condition and final judgment, between holding and executed sentence, that texts like First Enoch were careful to maintain as structurally separate events. The resonance between First Enoch's accursed valley and later Gehenna is genuine and worth acknowledging. The lineage is not a direct causal chain, and the differences matter as much as the similarities. First Enoch's valley is a designated gathering place for the condemned, described in future terms, with no indication of fire or ongoing torment at this location. The later theological Gehenna is a richer and more developed concept, carrying connotations of fire, permanent punishment, and individual fate. Both draw on a shared landscape and a shared instinct, the valley as the place where the condemned ultimately belong. But they are not describing the same thing in the same way. The valley is therefore designated before its gathering occurs. Its inhabitants are described only in the future tense, at the last times, during righteous judgment. The text gives Enoch a reserved landscape, not a presently populated one. The cosmological map therefore contains several temporal stages at once: stars already confined in fire, an angelic prison shown in advance of its permanent use, an accursed valley reserved for a future gathering. Final judgment remains future. But not every element of the cosmology is merely waiting to become active. Read as the final arrangement of the Book of the Watchers. These locations can be understood as a differentiated eschatological map. Human spirits in the mountain, celestial transgressors in separate places of confinement, and a cursed valley reserved for a future gathering. Historically, however, scholars of Second Temple literature have noted that chapters 22, 25, and 26 to 27 offer several afterlife locations that the text itself makes no explicit attempt to fully harmonize. The architecture of holding, judgment, and designated gathering place is a defensible synthesis of the completed work. It is not proof that every location originated as part of one seamlessly designed system. The mountain, holding architecture in the text's own geography, reached immediately after death, not the completed final punishment, but a categorized interim with genuine moral weight, the righteous at rest with the spring of water, their condition corresponding to what they are owed, the wronged pressing Abel's formal cry for vindication, their hollow oriented toward a future hearing, the guilty in a genuinely tormenting condition that is already adverse and already consequential, but that the text explicitly distinguishes from the further scourges and recompense the final judgment will deliver. The room that never opens, a category named in one sentence and never elaborated upon. Its occupants not raised on the day of judgment and not given additional punishment on that day. The only chamber the text explicitly says will not release its dead when the judgment arrives. Whether that represents reduced punishment for lesser sins, the completion of what life punishment already delivered, or a separate textual layer, the text never fully harmonizes with its surrounding material. The scholarly tradition has not resolved the question, and the text does not answer it. The fire that holds no human dead, two distinct places of fiery confinement for celestial transgressors. The first visibly occupied by 7 disobedient stars, already burning. The second, a permanent angelic prison shown to Enoch in advance of its full use. Both for categories of transgressor, the text handles separately from the human dead, who remain in the mountain's own logic throughout. The valley already marked, designated, and cursed in advance its future occupants described only in the future tense. The ground itself assigned a verdict-holding role before any condemned soul arrives there, resonant with later Gehenna imagery as antecedent vocabulary, not direct cause. A forward pointer in the text's geography toward a gathering that has not yet occurred. And the pattern underneath. Death begins moral separation, but does not complete judgment. The interim is real and already differentiated. What remains pending is the final and formal resolution, the reckoning that will confirm, intensify, or complete what the holding conditions have only begun. That day has been designated. It has not yet been named. What it resolves and who it claims is a different part of the story entirely. Many popular depictions of the afterlife collapse its stages into one moment, die, and face judgment immediately, die and go straight to the fire, die and find yourself already in the place your life has earned you. Later, Jewish and Christian traditions preserve distinctions between death, an intermediate state, and a final general judgment in various forms. But the popular imagination has characteristically preferred the compressed version. Death itself as judgment, the verdict implied by the life, delivered at the moment of death, without interval. This text does not allow that collapse. What it offers instead is something more precise than a simple waiting room. The mountain already contains moral differentiation, rest for the righteous, a formal petition for the wronged, a genuinely tormenting interim for the guilty. Death begins the separation. It does not complete the judgment. What judgment supplies is not the first consequence, but the final and formal resolution, the reckoning that will confirm, intensify, or define what the interim has only begun. The mountain handles human spirits. The fiery places of confinement are for celestial transgressors, a separate category in a separate location, handled by a different logic. The cursed valley's future occupants are described only in the future tense. The text gives Enoch a designated and reserved landscape, not a populated one. And the one chamber, the text says, will not release its dead remains where it is, not raised, not given additional judgment day punishment, left in place by the same text that offers every other category some form of forward resolution. Whether the interval is a cosmological model that later tradition found inconvenient and condensed, or a deliberate theological insistence that resolution must follow structure, and structure must precede execution, that is not a question this text answers. It only insists on the sequence. The separation is already real and already consequential. The completed reckoning has not yet arrived, and it does not say for how long that remains true.